Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney, and today is one of our HR's Roll-In series. I'm really pleased to be joined by one of the fabulous HR indies, Katy McMinn. Thanks, Katy, for joining. I know many of you have heard us before. In a moment, Katy, I'll get you just to briefly introduce the HR Independents. I know people have heard if they've joined on one of our other series of them. We're working together with the HR Independents. Actus are really in partnership with you in lots of ways, but I think it's good if people can hear what it is that you offer in terms of your membership to people. And the topic we're going to focus in on today, the specialist topic, is all about recruitment. So it's HR's role in recruitment, whether you're an independent or whether you're in an organisation. So over to you, Katy. Say hello for people who haven't met you before.
Thank you, Lucinda. Hi there. Absolutely delighted to join Lucinda today. So thanks ever so much for having me. You've said, Lucinda, Katy McMinn. I'm one of the co-founders and directors of HR Independents. So we launched now, it's crazy to think actually, we launched last September, the end of September. It seems to have flown by in some ways, and then in other ways it seems to have been such a long time ago. But we launched last September as the UK body for independent HR and people professionals. So what does that actually mean? So we have launched, and really our goal is to provide support and resources to the independent the independent profession, so HR and people professionals, to really help them grow and develop their businesses, really. So all of those sort of resources, all of the support that people need when they're running their own consultancy. And then what we also do is, we're absolutely passionate about really pushing up standards as well. And so what we really want to do is really promote our accredited members as well. We have platinum accredited members and who we've assessed against our standards, so that they're really professional, experienced individuals. And so we promote those to the business community as well. I think that's just some of what we do.
Yeah, it's great what you're doing, because it was missing, right? The massive gap. When you look back, it's mad that it was missing in the marketplace. And I suppose the point of this really is that we know that whether you are an independent HR consultant or whether you are standalone HR person or even independently minded, I know you appeal to all of those groups, that you can't be an expert at everything. Right, can you?
Yes.
So that's why we thought focusing in on some of these specialist areas, because people turn to HR professionals and expect you to be experts in such a wide range, you can't possibly be so. So that's why we thought we'd drill into these specialist topics. And also, I'll put links in the show notes to the HR website, but I know you've also got some resources that support each one of these modules that people can download if they want them.
That's right. Yes. So as you've said, we're doing a number of these specialist topics, and each of those will be accompanied by a resource that we'll be hosting on the HR Independence website. So you'll be able to.
Yeah. So you don't have to make loads of notes. You can go and download the resources if you want. Okay, fantastic. Right. Recruitment's an interesting one. That's what we're going to talk about today, and I think this is one of the areas that line managers often feel that they have to do. It's one of those ones that people perhaps know more about or think they know more about. So probably that means there's more risks that we can play into, I guess, in terms of areas. But I mean, what would you say in terms of why is it so important to do it right if you're an HR professional in terms of recruitment? What's the key things we should be thinking about?
Sure. So with recruitment, as you've said, it is one of those areas that so many different people do touch on when you're working in an organisation. People will have different touch points and feel that they have an awareness and a knowledge. And I think where HR, as you say, either in-house or if you're working as an external HR professional, what they can really focus on and help on is making sure that the recruitment that you do with an organisation, first of all, is successful, because getting it wrong, it can be quite costly. It can be costly both in terms of time and in terms of money. And I think we all know that when we go into a recruitment exercise, it does take a lot of time to hire people. It does take a lot of time to get the right person. And if you do get it wrong, first of all, what that means is you have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. But it can also be financially costly if you have actually gone down the route of advertising, or you've paid recruitment agency fees, which can sometimes be quite steep. Now, it may be that you do secure somebody, you do hire somebody through some of those processes, but if you don't get it quite right, what that can actually mean is you've brought somebody on board who isn't actually delivering that in that role, or, you know, even worse, is sort of what we call sort of a poor performer. That in turn, again, leads to much more management time. So by making sure that thought goes into the overall hiring process right from the start, and with that support from the sort of the HR side of things, there's certain things that you can think about to try and maximize success there. So it's thinking about your employer brand. I know we'll go through some of these, but thinking about your employer brand, thinking about what actually is that role. Have you got that job description? Do you know what you're looking for? Do you know what you're looking for and what the organisation actually needs for the future? Thinking about how are you actually going to go out there? How are you actually going to attract the right person and with the right skills? And what are those selection methods going to be? All of those sorts of things. So there's lots to think about. But when you break it down, and when you do have somebody supporting you through that process, that's when, as I say, you can maximise the likelihood of it being a successful hire.
It's interesting, the point this layers into, I've done quite a number of webinars and podcasts on onboarding, and when you do a bit of homework on that, it's clear that sometimes, whether it's poor recruitment or poor onboarding or both, you can lose like up to a third, I think, of people within like 6 months to 2 years. And if you have paid an agency 20% of the salary and that they're outside of the refund, then that's a lot of money. Not just that, and the whole sort of leaving a gap in the team and the investing in training people up. So it's so important to get it right. And that whole thing about employer brand, I mean, I suppose it's about having a positive or negative employer brand. As you say, it's probably a completely separate podcast on its own right. But there's something about knowing what your culture is, isn't there? So you want to recruit for cultural fit.
Yeah, absolutely. So the employer brand, as you say, I mean, goodness, yeah, it could be a whole separate podcast on its own. But the employer brand is really, it's where it all starts, and you need to be thinking about that before you even start recruiting. Yeah. But the first thing you do need to think about and be clear about really is, what are the values of that organisation? What is the culture? Because that is what you want to portray. That is what you want to build into your brand. You need to think about, at the moment, what sort of reputation do you have in the market, both with competitors, with other companies, and with job seekers, and just thinking about, what do you want to be known? What do you want to be known for? What's it like to work there? But also, thinking about the industry, thinking about the field of the sector. Are you seen as a leader in your field? Do you want to be seen as a leader in your field? And how do you make sure that that's coming through to the people that you're talking about? The danger with employer brand is a lot of organisations, they will have an employer brand that has developed and evolved, but often without them really consciously thinking about that and putting that thought and effort in. And it's a massively missed opportunity there. So going back to those values, that culture, what are those values, and how can you make sure that they flow through everything you do? And that's around not just when you actually put a job advert out there, but all of your social media channels, your website. Is there consistency there? And then when it comes to recruiting, if you've got all of those aligned, you can then make sure that your job adverts and the way that you actually go about hiring and selecting people all match up with that as well. So that means whatever experience a candidate has, it doesn't matter whether they're successful in actually getting the role or not. If they've had a positive experience, they will take that out into the market, and you can bet your life they'll be talking to other people about it. On a similar vein, if they have a negative experience, again, that will get shared out in the market as well. So that's
that's almost something you might not even think about as part of recruitment, right? That's the sort of the knock up. Actually, there's going to be more people that you don't take on than you do, and that.
Yes.
I'm thinking about how you reject people. We're all in it. We'll stay too much out before we even get into the actual recruitment. So we'll go back into the theme here. I suppose. Right. So here's the position. I'm a hiring manager, and I have identified a gap in my team that I want to recruit for. How would you help me?
So first of all, it's about looking at what that role is. And the first thing I would say there is, don't automatically think you just have to recruit somebody into the same role. If somebody's resigned and they're moving on, the danger that many organisations fall into is they will, as we say, recruit like for like. They simply go out and try and replace that individual. That sometimes might actually be the right thing to do, but this is a real opportunity for an organisation to actually look at that role and decide whether it's still the right role. So, have market conditions changed, or has the organisation, has the strategy taken a slight turn? And as a result of that, is this an opportunity to bring in a slightly different skill set, a different level of experience, or even, different specific market or sector experience that you didn't have before? So that, I always think that's one of the first things that you do. And that's where HR and hiring managers can work really, really well to explore that together, so that you know what it is that you're going to be looking for right at the outset.
Yeah, so those are kind of your job related skills. I suppose, just looping back to what we talked about with the cultural thing, what we found in our business is, let's say you've had someone who's left or wasn't a high performer, that helps us sometimes reflect on whether or not we also looked at the personality or the cultural. So working in an SME is entirely different to working in a corporate. And let's say someone who's a high performer in a corporate may have come into an SME and actually they really struggled to deal with the uncertainty or the constant jumping around, or vice versa. And I suppose there's things like that on top. You obviously have to start with the job role and what you need there, but also think about those more personality based habits or experience based habits make a difference.
Absolutely, and that's part of this whole process, and that's a good example you gave. Funnily enough, I was talking with a founder a couple of weeks ago about exactly this, that they've lost two people who they thought they were spot on in terms of really highly experienced, had really specific skills that they needed, but they'd come from a larger organisation and they got in. And there was no structure there. There was
processes,
and they didn't
have any people to do stuff.
There were no formal reporting lines, and it was a case of actually you had to get involved and do all sorts of different things. And I'm so excited about this hire, but actually what happened is that person was completely unsuitable, and luckily it was a mutual decision where this particular individual said, I just can't work like this. So that is an example of actually where they hadn't bothered to look at that side of things, and that can be that's where you just don't get the right fit.
And it's better to try not to learn that through trial and error.
Listening
to this, learn from us, don't learn through trial and error. But
on that note, so it's looking at those skills, it's looking at what you need, but the attributes as well, the style of working, and that's what you will uncover in that selection process. But it's about if you can develop a sort of a really robust job description that's accurate as well. That's the other thing, is sometimes businesses will have job descriptions in place. They're often very generic, sometimes irrelevant or just purely inaccurate. So taking the time to really be clear about setting out what the purpose is, what the scope of the role is, the responsibilities, the skills, as well as some of those attributes you've talked about, can actually really help with the success in terms of the hiring process. And it sets expectations clearly as well for both parties. So
again, so you don't want people to say that's not the job I applied for and you repent at leisure. The other thing, and I know we'll go into adverts here, that occurs to me that I must have learned, someone told me about this when I did NLP or something, but making sure that you appeal to the right language in the book. So let's say if I wrote an advert, I wouldn't be attracted to an advert for a detail, I want someone who's detailed, say attention to detail, methodical, but language that would appeal and specifies the type of person that you need for that role. Whereas, a marketing, let's say you'll be creative and happy to deal with ambiguity versus methodical and detailed. Now, I might feel that I don't want to write methodical and detailed because that doesn't feel like what I'm attracted to, but actually that's the person I want for the job. So just thinking, having the adjectives that the right personality will be drawn to in that role.
Absolutely, and it's about transparency as well, isn't it? In terms of reflecting what it actually will be like in that particular role, what it is that the person will be doing, what those skills are that they'll need. And it's also in terms of the adverts, it's thinking again though about that culture and those values as well, and making sure that they are aligned and they're consistent. And things like thinking about, sometimes an organization will, they want to sell a role because they want to get the right people in place. So they'll set out some really funky job advert, but the reality is actually very different when they come in. As you say, it actually might be a very, very process driven role, somebody that does need to be very methodical. And if they haven't made that clear in the job advert, you're not going to attract the right people who want to do that kind of role.
And they come thinking they're joining Google, and actually
they're
joining Siemens. But speaking of companies that I've been to, so on that, so we're talking about the adverts, advertising. What do I need to think about with that kind of thing?
So before you jump to the advertising, what I would always suggest you do, and it's always worth taking the time at this point rather than further down down the road, is once you've got that job description, you've got the clear scope of the role outlined, it's actually to do some benchmarking first to figure out what is the kind of package that you're going to be able to offer and that you want to offer. So that's what you need before you start advertising, because you need to know what you're going out with. And that, again, just on the benchmarking side, again, taking into account what we've just talked about, don't recruit or replace like for like. Have a look at, has the role changed? Don't automatically think, it's going to be the same sort of package again. You need to have a look at whether the role's changed. If it is similar, again, don't just assume that it's going to be a similar salary. Have a look, has the market moved on? Make sure that you do some benchmarking, thinking about the kind of talent. Is it that you're looking for a niche skill where you do need to pay a little bit more? But also just being really clear as well on where you're pitching yourself in the market. It's, different organisations will be at different stages in their own journey, and they will have different budgets and things like that. It's not always just about the package. It's in terms of the monetary side, it's what you're offering as well, the opportunity. But taking the time to think about, if the market is paying this kind of range, where do I want to be? Am I sort of more mid-market, or am I going to be one of those top percentile players? So doing that benchmarking before you go out to market is really, really critical. And it gives you the confidence that you're going out to try and attract the right people first of all. So that's the first thing. I think once you've got that clear in your mind, that's when you start looking at actually going out to market. So you've got your job descriptions nailed. Then it's distilling it into, how are you going to pull people in? And how you do that, how you sort of design that job advert, if that's what you're using, it's going to depend very much on the platform that you're using as an organisation. And there's no right or wrong way here. So it could be that an organisation, again, sometimes this comes down to size, it comes down to budget as well. But sometimes organisations, they don't even need to advertise. They can just utilise their own social media channels if they've got a really good presence there, if they've got a really good following. And that can be a really powerful way, because you're reaching out to your network to promote a role. So if you're going down that route, it's probably going to be more of a job title, a short paragraph to get people's interest. If you're going to go down a more sort of formal option, so a lot of people obviously use LinkedIn or other job boards, that's typically where you would use something that looks a little bit more like a job description now. Things change actually, and it's funny when you look at how things have developed. And traditional job ads, they used to be a lot shorter. And then if you go onto LinkedIn now, people want a lot more information before they take the time to actually apply. So looking at some of those, they do provide a lot more detail. So it's just thinking about what's going to be the right platform for you, and making sure that the advert that you use is appropriate to that. Other people, other organisations may decide, sometimes it's a combination, by the way, it's not always just one platform. Others may take a more sort of discreet but more proactive approach, using sort of a search approach where you're approaching people directly, either through your own network, through your expanded network, or through an agency or a headhunter. It's really about doing the research to find out what the best platform is for you. So where is that potential talent looking at the moment? So it's understanding your own market and understanding what's going to work best for you. Sometimes it's a bit of trial and error as well, to be honest.
Do you have any favourites or any sort of tips for smaller business, smaller organisations, larger organisations? What's your...
Yeah, so again, it really does vary depending on the sort of the reach and the network. But certainly LinkedIn, I think, is a really good way to go. Obviously, if you can link in with your network as well, and you've got people sharing things, that can be a really good source. They've also got some good cost-effective ways of advertising as well. Whilst you can sign up to really expensive sort of packages, they also have Recruiter Lite, which is a good one that I've used quite a lot. And you can manage and you can budget around your costs there as well. That works obviously for certain areas. LinkedIn. Indeed is another one. You can actually use that as a free version as well, and that gets out to different groups as well. So that's another good one, and that's another one where you tend to use a fuller job advert that gives candidates a lot more information before they actually apply. But again, sometimes social media is a fantastic way, because you're using your brand to bring people in, you're using your network, so you've already got some of those connections there as well. So, and as I say, sometimes it's good to do a combination of all of those as well. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we've got the job adverts, we've got people. Well, if we're managing our own job boards, then we've got probably quite a few, especially at the moment, applicants to sift through, haven't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if we're managing it all ourselves, no one's helping us with that. Any tips on sifting, screening?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, with any of those methods, there's different ways. Obviously, yes, some organisations will try and do it all themselves in-house. Others, they may not have HR support for sort of other areas, but that's when they might reach out. So that's where, external HR professionals can offer quite a lot of support again, and that will differ in terms of what each organisation needs. But regardless of how it's being done, in terms of then moving to that selection process, yes, hopefully you've had success in attracting candidates, and so now it comes to the time to actually start looking through those and deciding who to take forward. So again, it's thinking about the roles and responsibilities there. So is it the hiring manager who's going to be doing that? Is there HR support in the business? Will they be managing that, or working with the hiring manager, or will you be using somebody external, so external HR, for example? Again, no right or wrong, but what it's really important at this stage to be thinking about is being really, really clear on what are you screening the applicants against, and making sure that closely aligns with the job description. And it's about being objective as well. So thinking about at this stage, what are the key skills, experience that you need, and looking at each application to see how they match up. And it's, this is at this stage where it can be easy to let some of that unconscious bias creep in. That's again another separate podcast on its own, I think. Yeah, no, I won't go into too much detail there, but where it can be really helpful here is where you try and challenge yourself. So thinking about, what is it that you're looking for? Where can you see the evidence of that in their application, and taking it from there? And again, with this overall process, try and decide this early on so that you can be clear with candidates when they are applying, and if they do follow up, to say, right, this is the process that we're following. But just a few key tips is, thinking of some set questions to ensure consistency, fairness for all of the candidates. The first stage would usually be sort of a screening interview, I would say. Again, think about who might do that. But again, making sure that you've got set questions so that everybody's got the same opportunity, basically. Some organisations will use a scoring mechanism for that, so that they've got something to compare. But a big tip at this stage as well is, when you are going through that interview process, is remembering that it's a two-way process. So a lot of hiring managers, sometimes if they haven't had as much experience, they might be a little bit more nervous. But sometimes this also happens with more experienced as well, is they forget that actually, especially these initial interviews, they're as much about the candidate finding out about the organisation and the role as it is about the employer assessing them. So you need to make sure that you're actually selling that organisation as well. So it's very much a two-way process.
Like you think you've got your favourite candidate, and then they don't want to come on to the second interview.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and then just thinking about as well, as when you are interviewing people as well, just making sure that you're taking notes, but remembering that you need to make sure that those are factual, that you're not letting sort of opinions creep in there, and always have at the back of your mind that anything you're writing down, are you happy for those to be shared with the candidate, because they obviously can request those. So just being careful there.
Good point. Yes, we'll come back onto that. There's what we can keep, what we can't. Perhaps we'll have a chat about that at the end. Yeah. Having talked to Mary about data and retention, all these sorts of things.
Yeah. So did you want me to say anything more just on the selection process? I'm conscious that was sort of a bit of a general.
No, I think that makes sense. And also, actually, we've got another podcast that we've done in the past, which is quite good on competency-based interviewing. So I'll link that for another one. So it's always you can link on first. All of these are topics in their own right, aren't they? That we can go off down rabbit holes. So no, okay. So let's assume that's the case. We've gone through our screening, and you're mapping against it. So then we've selected and offered, or what happens next?
So again, it's the process will be determined by the organisation and by the role, what it is that you need to assess. So it may be that usually there will be interviews involved, but you might also use other selection methods that would be incorporated into the process. So it may be things like assessment days, presentations, psychometric assessments, for example. It's thinking about what is the best way of assessing some of the key skills for that role. So thinking about those different options. And again, that's where HR can play a really important role in terms of going through some of those options and helping design some of those, so that again you're getting all of the most valuable information so that you can make the right decision.
It needs to be robust, doesn't it? I mean, do you have a particular view as to what the right number of interviews are? So your first one, especially at the moment, is going to be a screening. And I know we've recruited for roles recently, and the market being as it is, we had 400 applicants for a role. So we screened that down to, and we screened that down to about 30 for the first stage, and we all took 10, and there was sort of 15-minute screening interviews, and then you got it down to the shortlist, and then we did a sort of interview, and then we did I'd say a mini assessment. It wasn't really an assessment, but we did a psychometric, a competency-based interview, and a sort of presentation. So we tried to look at the person in multiple ways, I suppose.
Yes, and that's a really good way of doing it. As you say, in looking at an individual in multiple ways, you want to get as much information to assess how that person will actually fit and perform in that role. And sometimes an interview on its own won't do that. In terms of how many interviews, again, there's no right or wrong here, but one interview isn't really going to be enough, especially if it's just that screening one. But at the same time, what you do need to be clear about, you need to think about, is not making it too drawn out for the individual as well, for the candidate as well. I've seen some companies where they've got candidates jumping through hoops, 4 or 5 interviews, a presentation here.
And then they don't make a decision or something like that, which is awful.
Well, yeah, they don't make a decision, but then it's also recognising that, especially, if this is an individual who's got, specialist skills, they don't need to wait around for that. They're going to be snapped up somewhere else. And so you risk losing a candidate because your process is too lengthy. So it's figuring out who are the key stakeholders that they need to meet. Figuring out what is the objective for each step in the process, what value is it going to add, and making sure that as soon as you've achieved that, you're not then just adding in unnecessary steps that aren't really going to be helpful for anybody.
Yeah, definitely. Makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing as well, I've had direct experience of if you have, especially because it's been remote interviewing, somebody can come over entirely differently on a second. You think, oh, they're brilliant, and then you ask a different question a different way, and go, actually, they're completely wrong. Or
yes, yeah.
So you do need to see them more than once, and maybe get more than one. So you want the right number. You don't want they shouldn't have to see every Tom, Dick, and Harry, but you need to have other viewpoints to assess against the same criteria.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And that's where sometimes, again, it depends on the role, but that's where also, if they are going to be a line manager, if they're going to manage a team, it's, getting them to meet some of the team as well. That's one of the things that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But again, and also just on that, just going back again to the sort of the values and the culture as well. It's also looking at your process and making sure that it aligns with that culture. So, thinking about it, if you are a relaxed, very fun, very friendly organization, but you have a really formal interview process with no focus on learning about the candidates as individuals, does that really fit? Is that really giving the candidate a feel for what the company is actually like? And vice versa, if you've got a very, very informal process and the candidate buys into that, and then actually they come on board and that's not how you work, and it is very, very structured and formal, again, there's that misalignment there.
The other point that I think is worth I think we've learned where we haven't done it is having that conversation with someone at the end. If you think that you like them, and you've obviously got to ask the same to all of them, so you do see them consistently, but it's more important if you think you like somebody to check whether they like you too. So we've, at the end of, say, the group interview, sort of said, obviously any questions you want to ask us, a bit more of the sales pitch on the business, and then say, if we were to offer, would you take it, or are you interested in the job, sort of there, and to gauge their reaction. Because I have had it where someone like, well, if it was part-time, sometimes that uncovers stuff that you don't realise it's going to come, and you might have gone, that's my preferred candidate, I'm going to offer to them, and actually they don't like you as much as you like them, or they've got another offer. They say, well, actually I'm choosing between this and another offer, sort of thing. So it's quite, I think it's that close, I suppose, from a salesperson. It's worth
it's that close, and it's a really good opportunity just to find out where they are in that job search as well. As you've mentioned, that's when you could uncover that actually they're at final interview stage for with somebody else. And okay, so if you're right at the beginning of your process, or even further along, sometimes what it can do is, sometimes if it's been going on for a little while, it's a really good nudge to say, we need to speed this process up a little bit, because we're going to lose out on a candidate. So it gives you that, it just gives you a bit more insight.
It's worth finding out where they are, isn't it? Having that direct conversation.
Definitely.
Okay, so we then go to the point we want to offer to them. What do we need to think about here?
So once you've found the candidate that you think is going to be fantastic, that's when you really need to make sure that the admin side doesn't let you down. So this is where it goes back to making sure that it's a slick process by going right at the beginning of the process. We talked about getting your benchmarking done, but one thing I didn't mention, but also thinking about, again, this will depend on the organizations, but thinking about, are there any approval processes, approval to hire or getting salary sign off, get that done early on, so that then once you've found your candidate, you can move straight ahead. You can make the offer, you can make a swift offer, you can get the paperwork out to people. So trying to make that as slick as possible, because there's nothing worse than you've kind of worked through a really nice hiring process and then it all stalls because things aren't in place, and you need to pause and pull all of that together. It's also obviously important to make sure that from an admin perspective and a legal perspective, that you're doing all of the following a process around are you doing your right to work checks? So do they have the right to work in the UK? I know you've just recorded a podcast with Ruth on immigration, so I won't go too much into that, but obviously
we'll link to that. Yes, absolutely.
With the new immigration rules that have been introduced, any non-UK workers would need a sponsor license. They don't automatically have the right to work in the UK if they're from the EU. So thinking about that. And interestingly, many often wonder, when's the right time to ask about the right to work? Can you ask people throughout the process? Typically, it can be an idea to put on your job advert, for example, that the employer will require documentary evidence of the right to the work in the UK. Others will wait until the offer stage to request those documents. If you are asking questions around that, all I would say is just make sure that you're asking everybody, regardless, everybody about the right to work, so that there aren't any sort of potential discrimination claims there. So that's just one thing. And then thinking about the background checks that you might do when onboarding somebody. So a lot of organisations now have moved away from the sort of the traditional reference requests now. I think we've all seen they're usually quite generic now, where you just get a line of, they worked here from X date to X date. So they don't often add a lot of value. So a lot of companies now, a lot of organisations will conduct background checks to verify who it is that they're offering, verify their experience, any qualifications. They can do the right to work checks, any FSA checks, for example. And HRI does actually partner with Verifile to offer this service. So it takes that admin part away as well for organisations, and you can just be really confident that the person you're bringing on board is who they say they are, and they have all of that qualifications that they need. So that's in terms of the offer. Another really key thing to think about as well, and this is another area where potentially organisations can fall down, is you can have a fantastic hiring process. You can, that's all run very smoothly, and then you get the offer out and the communication stops. So always make sure that, once that offer's gone out, keep in regular contact with them, keep in touch with them between the extension of that offer to actually when they arrive on their first day, so that they come on board still feeling engaged and positive. And then make sure as well, it's that you touched on it before, actually, Lucinda, the onboarding, the induction process, that's what sets people up to succeed. And that's, it's a key thing to think about. So bringing them on board, how are you going to get them up to speed? How are you going to welcome them into the organisation? How are you going to make them feel comfortable and feel like they know where to go to get information, all of those kind of things. And if that's a really positive experience, then you really are, again, sort of maximising your chances that person's going to start delivering quickly and also be happy and engaged.
Yeah, and that point about almost pre-boarding, particularly if, let's say, they've got a 3-month notice, so that's quite a long time to cool off, isn't it? And I think that if you can send over bits of information, bits of videos, learning and stuff that are probably quite motivating, which would be onboarding stuff that actually, if you were bombarded with it all at the time, on day one is a bit tedious, but when you're excited about a new job, it all counts staying in touch. So I think that's kind of working smart if you think about what you can send over.
Definitely.
So again, other topics, aren't they? Those, go on, sorry.
They are. I was just going to say as well, in terms of that induction process as well, it's just like you say, don't just have that as literally just information overload, because if you ask a lot of people if they have gone through one of those sort of traditional induction processes or inductions, how much of that information have they actually retained? And it's not always a huge amount. So making sure that induction as well is well structured. It's not, sometimes it's better to have it over a period of time, and thinking about what is it that new hires need to know and will benefit from, and structuring it around that. And again, making sure that it fits with your culture. So, I've seen so many organisations where the reality of the day-to-day is that it's a really fun, lively place to work, yet they still insist on putting a new hire in a conference room for 2 days, staring at a PowerPoint presentation to tick that box. So, try and get away from that.
Fair point. Okay, so great. We've got them there being positively on board, all those sort of things. Is there anything else we need to consider?
So in terms of other things to consider, I would say, yes, you've got your, hopefully that candidate has accepted and is coming on board, but also don't forget to feed back to those people that, potentially weren't successful, because we've talked about the employer brand. They will go out and talk about their experience. So try and make it a positive one. So if there is feedback that you can give, if there is constructive feedback that you can give, take the time to do that. It can be so helpful to people. And I know that some organisations, they sometimes worry about providing feedback, thinking, oh gosh, is it going to open me up to challenge here? Am I going to get lots of questions? Or even worse, am I going to get a potential claim of discrimination? And so because of that, won't go down the route of providing any feedback. And that's a shame, because constructive feedback, as I say, it can be incredibly beneficial and rewarding to candidates. they can choose to take that on board, and that will then help them in other interviews. But as I say, it really helps you in terms of developing that employer brand. If they feel that, okay, they haven't got the job this time, but they've been treated with respect and they've learned something, then that's a real positive, and it will leave them with a positive impression. But the other thing is as well, and it's important to remember, they may not have been right for that role, but they may be right for another role in the future.
Yeah.
And if you've built that relationship with them and something comes up in the future, you know that they will come forward, or you could potentially even approach them as well. So taking the time to feedback, I think, is a really important one.
Okay, fantastic. So that was a thorough, not wasn't quite a whistle stop. That was a thorough go through. You have covered a huge amount. So don't worry if you're listening to this. I'd say we will direct you to the HRI website where you can download a guide to this. I feel like we covered a bit of employer brand you got there as extra bonus points there, didn't we, as well? So that employer brand demystification. Plus, there are so many spin-off topics I hadn't really thought about. There's competency-based interviewing. There's unconscious bias. We need to do something on that, maybe. There's a bit of data protection stuff we've got to be careful about. You know, in right to work stuff, of which we have got a podcast on as well. So there's loads of things that spin off this. But that was definitely comprehensive, Katy. So thank you so much for such a thorough overview. It's great having you on HR Uprising.
Absolute pleasure.
As ever, I'll direct, it's Katy McMinn, and we'll direct all of the links will be on hruprising.com, and we'll link over to the HRI website as well, so you can get those downloads if you'd like them. Thank you for listening.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.